Welcome. Good evening. We are meeting after a gap of a week. And today we will begin a set of 3 lectures on Marx. And what we will do is we will begin, in fact, we will go sort of chronologically. We will begin with a text from what's known as the early Marx. This is to say, Marx, before he begins his full-scale study of political economy, which of course begins after he moves from Europe, from Germany, and then to Brussels, and then on to London, which is where he will spend most of his life. But this is from an earlier period. This is from the 1840s, when Marx has just come out of the university and is about to join political activities in Europe. So this is the period 1843. But this is from an earlier. This is from the 1840s, when this is what I mean, 1840, 43, 44. So this is when Marx has just come out of the university and about to join political activities in Europe, which will of course reach a peak in 1848 during the revolutions of 1848. And then, but in this period, this is a very, very intellectually a very rich period in Marx's life, because several things that he's doing, he's also collaborating with his lifelong friend Friedrich Engels. And this period is important because this is when he begins what he himself calls his critique of Hegel. And I'll come in a minute to what this critique of Hegel actually means. He begins this critique of Hegel and moves in a direction which will take him to his full-scale intensive study of industrial capitalist production, the production process of the new industrial economy of Europe, particularly of Britain. This is just the formative period. And this period, one of the things that I will emphasize is that a great deal of writing in this period, particularly among the younger intellectuals, I'll talk about a group that's known as the Young Hegelians, and a lot of the debates are about religion, about Christianity, about the place of religion in public life, what should be the relation of the state to religion. These become the most important debates at this time. And one of the interesting arguments that has been made is that many of these people who participate in these debates at this time, and Marx will engage in one of these debates with a very prominent young Hegelian. You've come across this name if you've read the text, Bruno Bauer. And it's been suggested that they write so much about religion largely because it was very difficult at the time in Prussia and many of these German countries to actually write directly about politics. That political discussion was so much under surveillance that they were, writings of political opposition, things that were seen to be politically subversive, were very, very immediately suppressed. And so it was very difficult to carry out public debates over politics. And so a lot of these debates, which are about religion, was really about politics. They were about issues of the state, or the question of rights, the question of sovereignty. What is the relationship between state lawmaking powers and the will of the people? Those sorts of things, which are really part of the ongoing struggles for greater democracy in Europe at this time. Well, a lot of those debates were actually carried out under the cloak of debates over religion. And we'll see how this plays out in this particular piece by Marx. So keep that in mind. And you can think about, as you read this text and we go through the arguments, you can think about how actually the more substantive issues were being posed. These are issues of politics, but they're not being addressed directly as issues of politics. Okay, so with that very brief introduction, let me move to the text itself. So is this screen visible now? Shovik, Rajashri, can you see the screen?
Not yet.
It's not there?
No, not yet. Try it again.
No, not yet?
Not yet, sir.
Not yet. Your screen is not visible yet.
No?
Yes, it's working now.
Got it?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes.
All right. Okay. So Marx, I won't go through the biography. I mean, you can, if you must know some of Marx's biography, but you can look it up later. But as I said, that well, he was born into a wealthy Jewish family in Germany, but the family had actually converted to Christianity. So he was never or the family was never a practicing Jewish family. He was educated in Bonn and Berlin, and then joined political movements in 1843. This is about the time when this particular text is being written. And then he moves to London after the 1848 revolutions, or the failed revolutions, and moves to London in 49 and is there for the rest of his life. Okay. Now, on the Jewish question, this particular piece was written in 1843 and published from Brussels. In fact, Marx and Engels both moved to Brussels around this time, and they're there until the 1848 revolutions. And it's published in what's called the Franco-German Yearbook, published in 1844, and it's a response to an article which Bruno Bauer, a young Hegelian, had written, which was called On the Jewish Question. We'll come to Bauer's argument and what Marx had to say about that particular essay in a minute. Now, the Young Hegelians, there were several, but the most prominent were Ruger, Feuerbach, and David Strauss, and Bruno Bauer. All of these people were known as Young Hegelians because they were some of them were actually directly students of Hegel. Hegel died, I think, in 1831. And many of them were directly students of Hegel. But at this time, especially when Marx was studying in university and through the 1840s, Hegel was the most influential figure in German philosophy at this time. Just a brief 2 or 3 sentences on Hegel. We could do several lectures on Hegel if at some other point we may want to do it. But Hegel, the most distinctive feature about Hegel's philosophy was that he was a great synthesizer, and what he synthesized was the sort of the deep rationalist philosophy of the Enlightenment, which reached its peak with Immanuel Kant, just previous to Hegel. But that philosophy was very much one which emphasized a kind of axiomatic structure of philosophical truth and certain universal principles of truth. They were meant, what was true according to reason was supposed to be true at all times, in all places, universally. They were universal truths. And that was the whole thrust of Enlightenment philosophy, until Hegel actually gave it a particular historical grounding by arguing that even such universal principles of reason could only have been discovered and known at a particular stage of human history. In other words, and in fact, Hegel has many, many lectures on the history of philosophy, on the philosophy of world history, and he actually goes into what was known in Europe at the time about, let us say, civilizations in India or China or in the Islamic world, and certainly they knew a great deal about philosophy in ancient Greece and Rome. And Hegel goes into all of these, and basically to argue that all the specific truths, let us say the ancient Greeks knew a great deal about the specific truths of mathematics, let us say, or of logic, let us say, right? And so did the Arabs, so did the Indians, so did the Chinese. But according to Hegel, it was only possible in Europe after the Middle Ages, in Europe after, in fact, the Reformation. It was only possible then for all of these truths to be synthesized into a single order of reason, which would rule all known knowledge. All knowledge would be brought under the rubric of this great, what Hegel would call the idea, this great idea, which would be universal, but which would encompass within itself all of the particularities, the varieties. They were all part of, as Hegel would put it, they were all part of earlier or lower orders of knowledge, of reason, of development. So he actually produced an entire philosophy of historical development of ideas. It was all, in history was, of course, for Hegel, entirely a sequence of ideas where a particular period, a particular age in a particular civilization is dominated by a particular idea which encompasses the whole society, as it were, all of knowledge in that society. But that idea reaches a limit at a particular point of time. It meets with an opposition. And then through struggle, it a new synthesis is built, not necessarily at the same place, and certainly at a later period, but a new synthesis is built. And that is how history progresses through the development of more complete and more universalized ideas over time. That was the sort of broad Hegelian synthesis that was at this point very, very dominant. So one of the things you will find in all of the young Hegelians, and of course very much present in Marx, is this idea of a historical development of society, which would be very, very strongly carried through to the later phase of the young Hegelians and Marx and Engels. But of course, as we will see later, the particular emphasis on history as essentially a sequence of ideas, which is why Hegel is often called the greatest idealist philosopher. That emphasis would be reversed in Marx and Engels, where they would say that it's not actually the result of the conflict of ideas, but rather there are material forces in society, social forces, which actually come into conflict and produce the great events, the dynamic events, which pushes history forward. Now, Ruger, Feuerbach, Strauss, Bauer, all of them had something of this tendency in them, in the sense that they all thought, particularly they thought the Hegelian construction itself was too conservative, that it actually sort of rationalized and theorized the world or history as it is, as it exists. And it didn't leave much room for actual activities, some kind of attempt to push history forward. There was no such element in the Hegelian sort of construction, which was, at least these young Hegelians regarded the Hegelian construction as much too conservative and sort of preserving the status quo, as it were. And so they were very keen to push things forward in some ways. And we will come to Feuerbach in a minute, because Feuerbach would have quite a significant influence on the young Marx. But Bauer is the specific young Hegelian who is engaged by Marx in this particular piece. It's as you've seen, it's a response to Bauer's article, which is called On the Jewish Question. And as I said, that in this whole argument, Bauer, by the way, all of the young Hegelians are, of course, as I said, they all engage with the question of religion and the place of religion in public life, in modern public life. They were all fundamentally against religion. So in some ways, although in this particular case, what is being debated is the question of Jewish rights, the rights of Jewish people, who were, of course, in Europe at this time, specifically discriminated against. They had been for a long time in Europe, discriminated against, not given denied a whole series of civil rights, not allowed to engage in a large array of professions. For a long time in many European countries, they were not allowed to, for instance, buy land or settle on land. Many of them were denied employment in public government services. They were denied entry into the army. So many of these kinds of discriminations were present in Europe at this time, well into the 19th century. And so what is that immediate issue here is the question of the rights of the Jewish people. What should be the civic rights of the Jewish people? And here Bauer makes the argument that, and we'll come to the argument specifically, that actually the Christian state can never emancipate the Jew. and he will make an argument as to why not. So what I was saying is that even though the religion in question here is the Jewish religion, all of these young Hegelians were actually far more critical of Christianity than they were of the other religions. They were all Christians, and except, yes, they were all Christians, and they were very, very critical of Christianity itself. Fundamentally, as you will see, even in Bauer, their basic contention was that religion must be abolished, that religion had no place in modern life. And so that's the fundamental argument or claim that they were making. As you will see, the issue really is, and this is what I will ask you to keep in mind, because this is not a question that has gone away. It's very much a question that is with us today. It's a question about the secular state. And what does secularism mean? And what should be the place of religion in modern life, in the life of a modern society? That is actually the fundamental question that is being debated here. And we'll see Marx's answer, and why Marx thinks that Bauer's way of putting the argument that all religion must be abolished, until that happens, there is no hope for any minority group, such as the Jews, to be emancipated. The only way Jews can have liberty is when all religion is abolished. Marx will argue that this is actually misreading the problem. And so the answer is actually an incorrect answer. So what is Bauer's argument? Fundamentally, he's arguing that the Prussian state is Christian. All of these people, they're at this point, they're mostly all within the what is at that time the largest German state, which is Prussia. Some of you would know that Germany does not actually become a single unified country until the 1860s. So that's much later. And in the 1840s, when all this is going on, Prussia is the largest German state. It's a monarchy. But there are countless other, I think several, I think more than 100 German small principalities all over Germany. And in most of them, and certainly in Prussia, it's the Protestant Christian church which is dominant. The Lutheran church, that's the German version of Protestantism. What Bauer is arguing is that the Prussian state is Christian. It has a monarch who is in fact the head of the German or the established church. This Christian state, because it is Christian, can never emancipate the Jew. So for Jewish emancipation, the Jew must give up Judaism. For human emancipation, all religion must be abolished. In other words, everyone must give up their religion for humans to be emancipated, to be properly free. This is, broadly speaking, Bauer's argument. Marx disputes this. And he disputes this by distinguishing between human emancipation, that is to say, the emancipation of all humans everywhere, and what he calls specifically political emancipation, which is not the same as human emancipation. Political emancipation, that is to say, emancipation that can be obtained through membership of the state. what is the freedom that the state can give? That is not the freedom of humanity as such. Does political emancipation, then, this is not human emancipation, political emancipation, does it require that the Jew give up Judaism? And Marx's answer is no, right? And this is the difference that Marx establishes with Bauer's main argument. So, the key distinction Marx is making between political emancipation and human emancipation, and as we'll see, that also becomes linked to a theory of history, of stages of history, of stages of development, of stages of historical development. Political emancipation will come first. Human emancipation can only come much later. There are specific conditions which have to happen in the course of historical development, before which you cannot have human emancipation. So that's the first key difference or distinction that Marx draws when analyzing this question of what is the place of religion in modern social life. And he makes this distinction between two kinds of freedom or emancipation. Political emancipation, that which can be found within the domain of the political life of that society. And second is human emancipation. That is to say, emancipation as such, let's say. Okay. Now, what is this domain of the political life or the state? And here again, Marx makes distinctions between three kinds of states. And all of these are all states that exist or existed at the time when Marx was writing. All of these three kinds of states were in existence. One is the theological state. That is to say a state, right, which actually is identified with a religion, is not distinguished from any religion. In other words, a state where there is an established church. In most cases, the monarch, who is the head of the state, is also the head of the church, right? And that Marx is calling the theological state, a state where there is no distinction made between the political establishment and the religious establishment. Those two things are fused into the same institution of the state. In this theological state, the Jewish question is theological. In other words, it's entirely a question of the way in which that established religion of the state will view the Jewish religion. Does it view the Jewish religion as a religion, or those who follow Judaism, that is to say the Jewish people, does that theological state regard the Jewish people as people who may be given the freedom of religion? And the answer to that question will only be theological. It depends on the theological way in which that established church, in this case, of course, the Prussian Protestant church, state, that establishment, how it will regard the Jews. And clearly in that situation, as we know, in the 19th century, there was no way in which the church regarded the Jewish people as worthy of being given the freedom of religion. So that's the situation in those states where the state is identified with a religion. The answer, therefore, could only be a religious answer. In the constitutional state, and Marx specifically mentions France. Now, this is France, post-revolutionary France, right? 19th century France, which is a constitutional monarchy at this point of time, right? This is where the monarchy has been restored. This is the July monarchy, the 1830, from 1830 onwards, there is after the defeat of Napoleon and the restoration in 1830, there is a sort of a revolution, and there is installed what is called the July monarchy, which is a constitutional monarchy in the sense that there is a monarch, but there is also a parliament and an elected parliament, and therefore an elected government which is responsible to parliament. The monarch is the head, is the constitutional head. This is the constitutional state. Now, this Marx calls a case of incomplete political emancipation. Incomplete. Incomplete because the state is still dominated by a Christian majority. Right? There is a Christian majority, and the Christian majority has rights which the minorities do not have. Okay? At this point, there are certain certainly Catholics. The Christian majority in France are Catholics, but non-Catholics did have some voting rights, but they were specific. It was not quite universal. And there were various other civic rights which were not necessarily given to the minority religions. It was a state, as Marx points out, dominated by the Christian majority. And so it is an incomplete political emancipation. In other words, the state is not completely separated from religion yet. Finally, there are the free states of North America. These are the free states of North America, which by then constituted the United States. Okay, and don't forget that because of the federal system in the US, different states had different laws in relation to the rights of freedom of religion, the rights of specific minority religions, and so on. They varied from state to state, which is why Marx does not speak of the United States as a whole, but the free states of North America, where the Jewish question becomes a properly secular question, right? A properly secular question. Mark that this is the context where the question of secularism in relation to the state actually emerges in European debates in the 19th century. If you look at, let's say, British debates in this period, the terms that are used are toleration or tolerance. The term secularism almost never comes up. You do get it in the United States because in the United States, once again, you have a much more strict question of separation between the state and religion. It's not just through constitutional laws, but also through the interventions of the courts, particularly the US Supreme Court. But we don't have to get into the details. But don't forget that Britain is very much a constitutional monarchy in the sense in which Marx describes France. And the question is certainly one of incomplete political emancipation, because the question of extending, let's say, political rights and civic rights to non-Christians is still very, very much under debate at this point of time in Britain. And the question always is put as to whether or not those religious practices and beliefs of those people, even though they are not approved by the state, nevertheless, the state will tolerate them, whether or not they will be tolerated. That is the question, which is how, for instance, Catholics, for instance, are given voting rights. After a point of time, the Jews are also given voting rights. For instance, non-European religions don't come into the picture until quite late, into the 20th century. So this is the distinction, the three types of states that that Marx describes. And in each of them, therefore, what he's suggesting is that the question has to be posed differently, and the answer will be different in relation in the question of what is the place of religion. What is the place of religion in public life under a theological state is a different question from what it is in the constitutional state and what it is in what Marx is calling the free state. Okay, these are three different kinds of situations, and in each of them, the answer is different. Now, what is this free state or the condition of political emancipation? Marx is still elaborating on his distinction between political emancipation and human emancipation. So he's considering here the question of what can be achieved in terms of the freedom of religion under conditions where the state can guarantee rights. Okay, so this is the problem he is addressing here. Any questions so far? Okay, so let's go on. So political emancipation requires the emancipation of the state from religion. And this is the key. As you know, this is the way it's often described in recent times in liberal theory. Religion becomes a private affair. The state is unconcerned with religion. Okay, so that is political emancipation. It is the emancipation of the state from religion. The state is freed from religion. It's a very interesting way in which Marx puts the condition. The condition is that the state has to be freed from religion. The understanding here is that the state is already assumed to be founded on something like popular sovereignty. This is the argument in the United States, for instance. This was also the argument in France following the revolution, that the state is founded on the sovereignty which the people were exercising. It's no longer the sovereignty of the monarch. It's the people's sovereignty, and the state was constituted by the people, and that state had to be freed or emancipated from religion, because religion in the entire European context is identified. This is the most interesting argument, and we'll see how Marx treats this. This is being identified as religion is identified with the established institutionalized forces or power structures of dominance, right? The religion, in other words, is already seen as an oppressive force on the people. It's identified with the earlier structures of political power. That is to say, the power of the monarchs, the feudal lords. They were seen to be allied with the established church. And that was the force against which the democratic struggles had been taking place in Europe. And so just as the state had to be freed from the power of the feudal classes, similarly, this is how it's being put. The state also has to be freed from the power of the religious establishment. So religion must now be made into the private affair of people. Okay? Religion is not being abolished. Religion is being made into the private affair of people. The public life of society, which is organized and regulated by the state, it must be unconcerned with religion. Okay? And this is where Marx is again reminding Bauer and, of course, all his readers that this political emancipation is not human emancipation. It is not human emancipation. Only the state is freed from divinity or the divine powers or those who claim to speak on behalf of divine powers. Private lives are not free from divinity. Okay? And here he gives this analogy, which of course in the later Marx will be so crucial. Just as the abolition of property requirement for citizenship does not abolish private property. In other words, you don't have to be a property owner in order to be a citizen. But that does not mean that private property is abolished, right? Private property continues, except it is no longer a requirement for citizenship. You can be a citizen even if you do not have property. But that does not mean nobody has property. Some people have property, others don't. In other words, property is not abolished. In the same way, Marx is arguing, some people may practice religion. They may practice different religions. Some people may not practice religion at all. Okay? Because it's all a private matter. It's entirely up to me or you to decide in what way we will practice a religion, or if we practice it at all. It's a private matter. But as far as the public life of the state is concerned, it does not matter what religions we practice or whether we practice religion or not. We are all members of the political community as citizens. Citizenship does not require us to have any specific religious identity. That's the distinction that Marx is emphasizing here. And that is what he's calling political emancipation, right? Mark, political emancipation is actually the emancipation of the state from religion. Individuals do not emancipate themselves from religion by this act. Okay, so that is the limits of secularism as Marx is defining here. So Marx goes on to elaborate. The state declares birth, rank, education, and occupation to be non-political distinction, which it proclaims, while it proclaims equal participation of all citizens in popular sovereignty. So everyone has an equal share in sovereignty. So one of the key markers of this equality is the fact that each citizen has one vote. Okay? So it doesn't matter what your rank is in society. Mark, rank is not necessarily abolished, right? In society, there may well be people who have a higher rank. So, whatever that rank may be, in whatever way rank is organized. In many of these societies, for instance, in France, for instance, or in Britain, certainly, there are various ranks. I mean, you have various feudal titles of different ranks. And of course, the large bulk of the people do not have any rank at all. They're the commoners, as it's called in England. But but as far as the political community is concerned, even if you were a lord or a baron or a count or a duke or whatever it was, as a citizen, you have one vote, right? And the worker in a factory also has one vote. That is what is achieved by political emancipation. The state declares birth or rank to be a non-political distinction. It doesn't matter as far as one's rights as a citizen are concerned. Similarly, education. Similarly, occupation. It doesn't mean that everybody is equally educated. It doesn't even mean at this stage that everyone has an equal right to education. Lots of people in Marx's time in England don't actually have a right to education. They don't have the possibilities of going to school at all. Many people, although it's clearly a situation that was rapidly changing through 19th century Europe. And occupation, certainly. There were enormous differences in terms of the kinds of occupations that were open to particular sections or classes of people. All of these distinctions continued. All that was achieved was that the state would not regard these distinctions as relevant when recognizing citizens for political participation, right? For participation in politics, all citizens were equal in the eyes of the state. The same argument would apply in the domain of law, for instance, that the law would apply equally, that the same laws would apply for all citizens, which is different from what it used to be in feudal society. Okay, the laws actually operated quite differently for persons of rank as compared to persons who had no rank. There were certainly between men and women, and all of those kinds of distinctions. Marx does not bring in the question of men and women here, because at this point of time, in fact, in Europe, nowhere did women have the vote. Except in France for a period, it changes over time. But Marx does not bring in the question of men and women, or gender. So, as far as the political distinction, that's to say, within the domain of citizenship, everyone is equal. These distinctions do not apply. But the state allows distinctions of birth, rank, occupation, etc., to act and assert themselves in their own sphere. Far from abolishing these factual distinctions, it presupposes them to exist in society. The state asserts its universality as the political state in opposition to the particular distinctions that prevail in society. So this is the great distinction, the fundamental distinction between state and civil society that Marx is emphasizing. This is drawn from Hegel. It's drawn from Hegel. Marx is only emphasizing this and suggesting that Bauer has confused the categories. Okay, that the state and civil society are different domains. This distinction actually comes into being as a result of the political revolutions that take place, the democratic revolutions that take place, and where the state becomes the domain of universal citizenship, where which is the institution of law, etc., which guarantees the particular distinctions that prevail in civil society. Okay, that's the key distinction. Then the civil society will become the domain of the private, and the state is the domain of the public. Okay, that's the key distinction that will take place. This is what Marx is calling the perfected political state, perfected political state. After the state, that is to say, which is politically emancipated. In the perfected political state, and this is a very famous passage in Marx, man leads a double life. As citizen, he lives in the political community where he is a communal being. In other words, he is part of a collective. He is part of a community. But as private individual, he lives in civil society where he is separated from his community and regards others as means to pursue his own self-interest. So this is, you will see, a great separation between what you might call the sort of basic dynamic or force that leads forward or activates these two domains. One is the domain of the state, where it is a sense of community, a sense of solidarity, a sense of being together with everybody else. That is what binds together this political community of the state, where everyone is an equal citizen. Okay? And you can think of this, Marx doesn't mention this, but you can think of this as being activated, as I said, at times of national crisis, right? In times of war, when precisely this sense of everybody being together, everybody being part of the same community, that is the abiding or the most as the strongest sentiment that comes to the fore. Whereas in civil society, which is from Hegel's time onwards, defined as the domain of the satisfaction of needs, the needs of people. Don't forget, you can easily remember Adam Smith here. This is the domain where self-interest rules. This is the domain where people engage in production, they produce things which they buy and sell then in the market to get other things which they need, okay? And through this process, they satisfy their various needs through this sort of self-interested exchange or interaction with others in what in Hegel and Marx is being called civil society. Okay? This is the domain of self-interest. But this is in contrast to the domain of the state or the political community, where it's not individual self-interest which rules. There it is the collective concern, the collective solidarity, which is the dominant sentiment. Now, so he is actually marking or identifying the limits of political emancipation. This is what political emancipation actually achieves, right? It does not abolish religion, just as it does not abolish private property. It does not abolish distinctions of education or birth or rank or occupation. All of those distinctions continue in civil society where individuals are distinct and different, right? And each individual pursues his or her self-interest in order to satisfy his or her needs, right? The political community, on the other hand, is where everybody is collectively has a share in the sovereignty of the state. The state guarantees everyone, every individual, the right to pursue his or her self-interest and thereby satisfy his or her needs in society. So the activities of civil society are in fact guaranteed by the state. As you know, go back to our discussion of Adam Smith, for instance. What guarantees that this kind of self-interested activities in the marketplace, where nobody thinks of others, of the benefit of others. Everybody is thinking only of benefiting oneself. And yet, as Smith says, the net result, the final result will be everybody will be better off. How? What are the conditions? The conditions are, of course, that each person's right to private property is ensured, that nobody steals, that nobody breaks contracts, right? That there is trust, right? That contracts are obeyed, fulfilled. If, in fact, contracts are broken, then I or you have the option, the opportunity of going to the state, going to the court, and having the contracts restored, or having one's rights restored, or if in fact something has been broken, then to be compensated for it adequately. That is the guarantee, and that guarantee is offered by the state through its law and its judicial system. That is the guarantee for the continuation of self-interested activities in civil society. So political emancipation is by no means human emancipation. It is a limited achievement, and this is what Marx is emphasizing. It is a limited achievement, even though it is a big step forward. As real practical emancipation, it is the best possible achievement within the prevailing condition. So Marx is emphasizing, and this is again against Bauer's claim, that there is no point making this plea that only when there is human emancipation will people be free. Marx is again pointing to this historical theory, right? A theory of historical development, where political emancipation is something that can be achieved at the present moment, at this time. That is the demand of the democratic revolutions that was going on, that was in the air in Europe at this time. Okay, so that is political emancipation, which is a practical achievement possible. Human emancipation was very much in the future, because that requires conditions that are not to be found at this moment. So that again is the other distinction that Marx is drawing here. Questions? Okay. Now, what is achieved? Separation of religion and state is political emancipation itself. It's completion. It's the completion of political emancipation. This distinction between the public and the private. Okay? The perfected Christian state is the atheist democratic state, where human foundation of religion is realized in a secular way. In the free state, that is to say, he's talking again of North America, there is a wealth of religious diversity and opposition in civil society. Now, it's the perfected Christian state which becomes the atheist democratic state. Okay? where the human foundation of religion is realized in a secular way. What does this mean? It effectively means that religion, the foundation of religion, is now in human lives, okay, in their private domain, right? This is not publicly established by diktat, by law, as in the theocratic state, right? Law does not declare this will be a religion and this is what you must do to be religious, right? To be virtuous in a religious way. The human foundation of religion is realized in a secular way because once the state and religion is separated, once they're separated, religion in practice and in faith becomes an individual matter. It is for individuals now to decide for themselves what religion is, how it must be practiced, or whether it must be practiced at all. Okay, which is why Marx puts it this way, that the human foundation of religion is realized in a secular way. Okay, so apparently it seems kind of paradoxical that religion is realized in a secular way. What it means is that actually that religion is actually human. So once again, what is implied here is that the foundation of religion is actually human. Religion has not been instituted by some supernatural entity or by the scriptures or by a church. Religion is something that is founded, right? That has its ground in the human, in individual humans. In a sense, you could think of why this is perfected Christianity is, in fact, this is precisely the move that Protestantism makes in its fight, in its struggle against the Roman Catholic Church, where, of course, in the Roman Catholic Church, it's all a question of the church declaring what is proper religion and how it must be practiced. The Protestant, all the Protestant sects basically reject that claim of the Catholic Church and actually rests the entire matter of religious faith in the individual conscience. It becomes a matter of the individual conscience, of individual convictions, individual faith, right? To believe or not believe, and to believe in a particular way rather than another way. Okay? And this is what Marx is pushing. Once again, it's a historically based theory, pushing to say that this is fully realized in a secular way once church and state, or religion and state, are separated. So in the free states, and he is pointing to the North American states, where he's saying that although the state and religion are separated, state is in fact an atheist democratic state. The state has no religion. State cannot declare religion. In fact, in the United States, formally speaking, the state, there is what is called a wall of separation. The state, in fact, technically speaking, you cannot even have prayers in formal ceremonies of the state. There is nothing religious that can be admitted. And yet, this has been always true. It was true very much in the 19th century. It is still true in the United States that there is a wealth of religious practice in society. There is a diversity of religious beliefs in society. That American society and American people are deeply religious, as we all know, compared to, for instance, the very, very secularized even private lives of Europeans. The United States is a deeply religious country. And yet that is where, as Marx is pointing out in the 1840s, the separation of state and religion has gone the farthest, right? He's calling it the perfected Christian state. Okay, how is this different from human emancipation? What would be human emancipation? Only when real individual man is no longer an abstract citizen, but becomes a species being. I'll explain that in a minute. A species being in his empirical life, in his actual life, in his empirical life, work, and relationships. Only when social forces are no longer separated from him in the form of political force, only then will human emancipation be completed. Now, when individual man is no longer an abstract citizen, which is, of course, what it is under political emancipation, it's only in that domain of citizenship, the citizenship of the state, participation in popular sovereignty. That is where the individual man is equal to everybody else, a collective being, a communal being, etc., but only in the abstract, right? This individual has, you might say that individual has no name, has no history of birth, has no religion, has no educational level, none of those specific particularities of actual social life is of relevance in that aspect of membership of the collective, which is called the state or the political domain, right? When that no longer exists, okay, man is no longer an abstract citizen, but becomes a species being in his empirical life, in his actual life in society. What is species being? Now, here you have to go into a little bit of the prior history of the tradition to which Marx belongs. Again, Hegel, but Feuerbach in particular, where there is, and we've come across this earlier, already an idea of something called human nature, which has emerged, certainly from the 17th century onwards, an attempt to identify what is the most essential aspect of the human as distinct from other animals or other forms of life. What is specifically human, right? And that is where there is an entire sort of natural law kind of theories which have emerged, which attempt to get away from a strictly speaking theological argument about the human, which of course in the Christian doctrine, it goes all the way back to the story of creation and of human beings being a special creation of God, right? From the story of Adam and Eve onwards. And then that distinguishes humans from other animal species. And of course, the human nature is something that's entirely then theologically constructed. But from the 17th century onwards, there is an attempt to move away from the strictly scriptural or theological conception and to try and formulate something like human nature in the same way that natural laws were being formulated for the natural world, right? But the same way that, for instance, the sciences, the physical sciences were developing. Laws of nature were being formulated. Newton, for instance, as the most influential and celebrated formulation of a certain set of natural laws, which are universal. Everywhere in the world, you will find natural objects which move according to the laws of motion as formulated by Newton. In the same way, there were certain kinds of natural law arguments that were proposed from the 17th century onwards. For instance, the idea of somebody like Hobbes, for instance, Thomas Hobbes, of human beings essentially again being self-interested, interested fundamentally as being naturally free. Okay, there is a conception of something called the state of nature, and in this state of nature, human beings are supposedly entirely free. There were no laws, there were no external forces that were keeping humans regulated, or nothing was prohibited, nothing was commanded. Human beings were entirely free, and these free human beings, all they would do was to pursue their own self-preservation, of course, was the first thing, preserve one's own life, and whatever possessions one had, that preservation was the fundamental characteristic of human nature. So human nature, again, this is where the self-interest argument comes up for the in a very strong way, that human beings are characterized in this way. But then there were others who disputed this, and who went all the way, for instance, into somebody like Rousseau, for instance, where the collective, where participation, all of these things become fundamental in defining something called the free individual. These are all attempts to define something called natural, what is naturally given to the human species. Okay? Now, by the time you come to Marx's immediate intellectual predecessors, especially Feuerbach, there is something in the German, this is the translation we get in English of the species being. That is to say, the existence, the innate nature of humans as a species. Okay, what is innate to human beings as a species? And there, for instance, in Feuerbach, you get this argument of the human. What is human is the creative instinct, that humans create. There's a whole range of animals and living creatures you will find who do the same things of self-preservation, sustaining their lives. The argument would be there is nothing specifically human about this. Animals do the same thing. They preserve their own lives. Many of them preserve their children, for instance, protect their children. So all of that there's nothing specifically human. What is specifically human is this creative, that is to say, the conception that humans imagine something into existence in their minds, create something in their minds, and then they put that into existence in reality. Right? This is the creative instinct, and the typical examples of this would be the craftsperson, the people who are engaged in crafts, in working and producing objects and things which may be functional, useful things, or things which are aesthetically pleasing. Okay, all of these, the argument crucially is that these are all things that are first imagined in the mind and then brought into existence through work, through labor. Okay, this is crucially species being. and Feuerbach was one of the immediate predecessors of Marx who makes this argument. Marx, and this, he's working on this more or less at the same time, 1843, 44, especially there are the famous economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844, which of course were not known for a very long time. They were only discovered and published in the 1920s, 1930s, I think, no, late 20s. And there Marx actually moves this idea of the human subject as essentially a creative subject, and then makes the argument that under conditions of capitalist production, or in the conditions of bourgeois society, this species being of humans, right, is alienated. That is to say, the industrial worker no longer, unlike the craftsman, for instance, the industrial worker labors, makes things, but not according to one's own, his or her own imagined creative design. The design is given, right? It's the capitalist, it's the owner of the factory who tells the worker, this is how you must produce, this is what you must produce, and this is how you must do it. And that is the key to what would become Marx's argument about alienated subject, the alienated subject. What Marx is referring to here, this is still not, it's being worked out in Marx at this time. This is again 1843. So what Marx is hinting at is that when the individual man is no longer an abstract citizen, just an abstract citizen, but actually becomes a species being in his empirical life, that empirical life, work, and relationships. That is to say, in existing civil society, he is no longer alienated, right, but is actually free. Only then, only when social forces are no longer separated from him in the form of political force, only then will human emancipation be completed. Okay? It will mean the end of the separation between the abstract citizen who shares equally in the popular sovereignty which founds the free state, and unequal empirical individuals in civil society. In other words, human emancipation must mean the end of this separation between state and civil society. That distinction must go. Okay? And the being a member of the collective, being a member of the species, right? Being free and at the same time a part of the collective. All of these things which have now separated, man is leading a double life, etc. That will end. Only then would we have human emancipation proper. Okay, the end of this distinction between state and civil society. Marx later on will, of course, have a much more specifically grounded theory of what is this condition of alienation, the specific argument about labor in particular, industrial labor being alienated, what is alienated labor. All of this will come when he will begin his inquiries into the nature of commodities, capitalist production, etc. His later work. He is still anticipating much of this at this point. And of course, later on, he will even mention what he will call the state of communism, which comes at the end of, it's not just end of bourgeois society and some kind of socialist state and society, but even transcending that, when there is no distinction anymore between state and civil society, or state and society at all. And that a certain condition of communism proper All of that will be a much later part of Marx's work. As I said, he is only anticipating here, but what is crucial is he is making these distinctions between different stages of political emancipation and the distinction and the limits of political emancipation, what can be achieved or what can be expected from political emancipation, and how that is still falling short of what is human emancipation. Okay, and this is his full answer to Bauer. So basically to say, let us not confuse political emancipation with human emancipation, because they relate to very different stages of historical development and involve very different kinds of problems that are being addressed and solved in those two separate cases. Any questions? Now-
Hello, this is Rishit.
Yes, yes, please.
I just want to ask once if I have understood it right, but does the meaning of political itself is the separation of secular and religious?
Well, yes, political emancipation, the emancipated state is where religion and the political are separated, right? In states that are not what he's calling the perfected political state. That is to say, in a theological state, clearly that is not the case, right? Secular, it's not secular. There is no distinction. There is, in fact, no distinction between religion and the state. The two are fused. Even in what he's calling the constitutional monarchy, that is to say, in states where there is an organized church, which is identified with the state, right? You may have certain rights of religion that are guaranteed to various groups of people, but it's still not the complete separation of state and the political. So what he's claiming to be political emancipation is actually the freeing of the state from religion. Okay, that is the key argument, that the state must be freed or emancipated from religion. That's the separation. Okay, so let's come to something that, again, that expresses this question from a slightly different angle. So what is actually the place of religion here? Even when there is political emancipation, as Marx says, religion is not abolished. Religion continues. Why does it continue? And what is the role of religion? And here there is a very, very famous and much quoted passage, which is from Hegel's or Marx's introduction to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, which is roughly at the same time. He's writing this more or less at the same time, 1843-44. And there is the famous passage there where religious suffering is at one and the same time the expression of real suffering and a protest against real suffering. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of the heartless world, and the soul of the soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people, right? Very, very famous passage, you must have heard it. What he's suggesting is that one and the same time, religion is an expression of suffering and a protest against that suffering, right? So religion continues, even when there is political emancipation, even when the people have been given rights, the right to practice religion, the various civic rights. We'll come to this in a minute. The state guarantees these rights. And religion continues because oppression continues. This is the key. Political emancipation is not an end to oppression, because in civil society, where distinctions continue, right, there are relations which end up in being exploitative relations. Even though people have, let's say the right of property, right? Everyone has the right to have property, but everyone does not have property, right? Some have more, some have enormous property, and lots of people have no property at all. Now that leads to relations in civil society which are exploitative, right? People are forced to work for others for wages, right, which end up being exploited. Now, that is real suffering. And when there is real suffering, and this is where Marx is emphasizing the role of religion. When there's real suffering, religion is an expression of that suffering. It can also be a protest against that suffering. So people may want to mark their wish to be relieved of that oppression. They may wish an end to that oppression, but they express it through religion. All right? So the abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of the people. This is the opium. The illusory happiness of the people is the demand for their real happiness. To call on them to give up their illusions about their condition is to call on them to give up a condition that requires illusions. All right? So what he's suggesting is, so this is, you might say, a kind of response to Bauer's claim that, oh, you must first have human emancipation, you must abolish all religion. Marx is saying that if you are asking people to give up religion, you must first remove the conditions which require them to have these illusions that religion gives, right? You cannot ask people to give up their illusory happiness while the conditions which create the need for illusions continue. Okay, so what Marx is actually saying is, first, remove the conditions of oppression. Only then can you, in all fairness, ask people to give up religion. Because if, as long as oppression continues, real oppression in real society, as long as that continues, you cannot expect people to simply abandon what you know to be illusory. Well, they actually believe that that's the way they mark their suffering and protest against that suffering. Religion is the way they protest against suffering. Okay, so this, as Marx says, can come not with political, but with human emancipation. That the conditions that make the illusions necessary, in other words, the conditions of oppression, will not end with political emancipation. It requires human emancipation, which is an altogether different stage. Okay, now we can move to the question of this distinction between rights of man and rights of citizen. This is the famous declaration of the rights of man and citizen, which is made in 1789, the French Revolution. There is this famous declaration of the rights of man on the one side, human rights, you might say, and the rights of citizenship. That distinction is already there. in 1789 in the French Revolution. And what do these two sets of rights mean? Okay, and the one on the left, rights of man. This is the rights of man are precisely the rights of individuals in civil society. These are the rights that are guaranteed by the state. Okay. What are these rights? The right to membership of civil society. Okay. Everyone has the right to engage in interactions in civil society, to be members of various civil associations, to engage in interactions with other individuals in society, in civil society. No one is to be excluded, therefore. Rights to equality, liberty, security, and property. Okay, these are, we all know, fundamental rights, basic rights, they're called different ways in India. Under the Constitution, we have these same rights: equality, liberty, security, and property. Interestingly, the Indian Constitution, formally speaking, did not include property as within the list of fundamental rights, but later on, through various court judgments and so on, and through implications from other rights, constitutional rights, property is pretty much a recognized right in India. It was not included anyway. Does anyone know why the right of property was not initially included in the Constitution, in the list of fundamental rights? No? Who are the political science students? Anyway, there was a big debate in the Constituent Assembly. The reason why it was not included was because there was at the time a major demand, not just within the Congress, but also particularly among the various socialist and communist parties at the time, that landed property, large landholdings, land proprietorships, landlordism proper, must be ended, and land reforms, agrarian reforms must be carried out. So the big landlords would have to be, their estates would have to be broken up. In order to do this, you would have to pass laws. And the argument was that if property was included in the Constitution as a fundamental right, it would become impossible to break up the big landed properties, which was a fundamental condition for the new economic arrangements that were being thought of. So, which is why property was not included. But as we know later on, especially when various agrarian reform, land reform measures laws were passed in different states of India through courts and so on, property rights actually became recognized. And we know many of these land reform acts were actually never properly implemented, precisely because this idea of property as essentially a basic right in civil society kept being reaffirmed. Now, so these are the basic rights, which you might say civic rights, the rights or human rights in civil society. The right to pursue self-interest is, of course, the basic motivation in engagements in civil society. This is all the economic activities of civil society, the way in which people satisfy their needs by interacting with others. That is the right to pursue self-interest. The basic characteristic, as Marx points out, of man in civil society is egoistic, self-interest, egoistic man, where it is basically one's self the fulfilling of one's self-interest, fulfilling one's own needs. That is the fundamental characteristic of the rights of man, of civil society, rights of individuals in civil society. Marx keeps repeating egoistic individuals. On the other side, you have the rights of the citizen. This is membership of the community, the political community, participation in popular sovereignty, right? It's the right to political association, Man as citizen is an abstract moral subject. I have already explained this earlier, that as far as citizenship is concerned, these distinctions of civil society are not meant to be relevant. As far as membership of the state, of the political association, or the political life is concerned, every citizen is the same. Every citizen is the same. They count for the same. Their opinions are of equal value, which is why the idea that when there is voting, every citizen, everyone who's entitled to the vote, has only one vote. Okay, it doesn't matter. Even the biggest philosopher has one vote, just as the most common worker will also have one vote. Okay, because the argument is that as far as membership of the political community, membership of the body of the sovereign body, the popular sovereign body, everyone's opinion counts for the same. They have equal value. But this is only in the abstract. It can only be an abstract moral subject, right? Who is of equal value, irrespective of which individual it is. Now, Marx points out some very interesting features here. That when the rights of man, that is to say, when rights in civil society come into conflict with political life, the former must cease. Human rights must cease when the political community or the state is threatened. Thus, freedom of the press, for instance, and he gives specifically this example, freedom of the press is suppressed when opinion is expressed against the state. Now, Marx points out that actually this is paradoxical, because in theory, the state is supposed to guarantee the rights of man, or human rights, the rights of individuals in civil societies. The state is there to guarantee those rights. In practice, those rights are curtailed when the state feels threatened. And Marx actually points out from the history, especially of revolutionary France, what happens in France after the revolution, that this happens even at moments of revolutionary action. That even in that history, you will find, of course, there is the famous period of the terror, which follows immediately after the revolution, when for the revolutionary regime to sustain itself, to protect itself, a whole set of civic rights are violated. There is, in fact, the rule of terror at that point of time. We have the famous guillotine and so on. Now, why does this happen? This paradox. Marx says actually there is no paradox. This is because the political revolution is in actuality the revolution of civil society. In other words, and what he's hinting at here is that political emancipation, or the revolution that takes place, the democratic revolution that takes place, which ends the feudal social order and creates this new state, which is the politically emancipated state. In actuality, that revolution is not the revolution of the people as such. It is the revolution of civil society. It is the revolution of egotistical humans in civil society. In other words, he is pointing specifically to the bourgeoisie, whose interest it is primarily, whose, you might say, agenda it is primarily, to make this separation between state and civil society, bring about political emancipation, to end feudal rule, okay, and create this order where a new state will be instituted to protect the rights of civil society. And this state, if it feels threatened, then even the rights of civil society can be compromised in order to protect the state. Okay, so this is the situation which Marx is pointing out. Why is it that this new state, right, the state which is supposed to protect, let's say, civil liberties, that is the state which then suppresses civil liberties in order to protect itself when it feels threatened? And this is the reason why Marx says this happens, because the state, in fact, is actually the state of those who dominate civil society. He is bringing in this question of power within civil society, in actual civil society. What is the nature of actual power in civil society, which is reflected in the state and which is expressed precisely, or which comes forward, especially at moments of crisis, when the state is supposed to be in crisis. So here again, he is bringing in this whole historical theory of how these various stages of development of the idea of the actual practices of freedom or emancipation take place, from feudal to the bourgeois state. So under feudalism, civil society, that is to say, the society outside the state, is directly political. As you know, in Europe, there were these different orders. Entire society was different into the nobility as one order. Then there was the church, which was another order, right? Then there was what was known as the third estate, which was essentially the merchants and the bourgeoisie. And then there was those who were not ranked at all, the commoners. Entire society was directly political because it was divided and organized on these political distinctions, ranks. This is brought to an end by the French Revolution. It abolishes the political character of civil society. Okay, and that is where it proclaims all citizens are equal. They are all part of the sovereignty, popular sovereignty, which is the foundation of the state. And state is separated from civil society. Now, egoistic man in civil society becomes the foundation of the political state. It is these individuals who are distinct, who are interacting with one another as egoistic, self-interested individuals, that becomes the foundation. So civil society becomes the foundation of the political state, unlike the older feudal order. So this is effectively the answer that Marx provides to Bauer's formulation of the problem or the question, the Jewish question. So it's a much more nuanced answer. And as you know, in many ways, we will come to this in a minute, it has a great bearing on our present discussion, which continue even today, about the place of secularism, what is the secular state, what should be the role of religion in public life. All of these are, in fact, directly addressed in this particular essay by Marx. There is a sequel, as you would have noticed, which occurs when Bauer actually writes a sort of rejoinder, which is then answered again by Marx. And there, Bauer had argued that the Christian had only to free himself from religion in general in order to be truly free. But the Jew had not only to free himself of religion in general, but his own particular religion as well. Okay, so Bauer was making this distinction between the position of the Christian in the Prussian state and the position of the Jew, right? And his final argument was, of course, that everyone had to give up religion. But the Christian had only to free himself from religion in general, because in a sense, Bauer was assuming that the Protestant religion had in fact arrived at a certain generalization or universalization of the question of religion or religious belief. And all that needed to be done is simply to declare an end to religion in general, which Christians were in a position to do. But the Jew could not do this because there were two things that the Jew had to do. First, declare that all religion should be at an end, but that his particular religion must also come to an end. In other words, what Bauer was essentially hinting at was that the kind of Protestant revolution that had taken place in Christianity, right, where religion had been turned into a matter of individual conscience rather than one of collective institutional dictates or regulation. This had not happened. It had not happened in Catholicism, and it had not happened with the Jew either. There was institutionalized religion. And so the Jew would have to do those two things step by step. Marx replies once again that Bauer misunderstands the nature of human emancipation. Again, Marx is pointing out the confusion of stages, that political emancipation, which is the only thing that the state can do, was not the same as human emancipation as such. And here Marx the real practical religion of Jews is the religion of haggling, that is, of exchange and money. That is the practical religion of capitalist society. Hence, human emancipation in general requires universal emancipation of Judaism. This, of course, is a metaphorical way of putting the matter. What he suggests, what he's saying is that if one looks at Jewish religion in its practical aspect, which is that most Jews in Europe were merchants and traders, and so the religion of Jews, the practical religion of Jews, is in fact the practice of exchange and money, right? And that is the practical religion of capitalist society. So effectively, everybody must give up what is the Jewish religion in them. What Marx is, he's putting it ironically in this sense. What he's suggesting is that it's not the particular problem of the Jew. It's the problem of everybody in European society, Christians included. Because as long as you are practicing the religion of capitalist society, you are practicing Judaism. Okay, so everybody has to give up the Jewish religion. So what essentially Marx is replying to Bauer by saying that it's pointless to make this distinction between Christians and Jews as having different kinds of problems and agendas to fulfill, or the problems to resolve, because in fact the problems are the same for all. The problem is, at one level, one stage, it is political emancipation, which is the same for everybody, but political emancipation in itself is limited. It achieves only limited things. What it does is create an abstract equality of citizens in the domain of the state, but inequality and oppression in civil society lays the condition for inequality and oppression in civil society. And so the end of religion, or the end of human emancipation as such, would actually require the end of those conditions of oppression in civil society, and therefore the end of that separation between state and civil society. And that's a very different problem altogether. So let me stop here, but questions, please. No questions?
There's nothing on the internet.
Partha, this is Rajoshi. May I ask a question?
Yes, yes, please, please.
Yeah. So, Partha, I was especially curious to know, and this is about a philosopher who predates Marx, but is also in his own times an important critique of Kant. I'm referring here to Schleiermacher, who was,
Schleiermacher, yes.
yeah. So he was both a very important theologian, but also, was speaking to a lot of the political and social issues that would concern Marx in the Prussian state.
Mm-hmm.
So in his letter to the Jewish householders, Schleiermacher said that, if I may say so, was encouraging the Jews to kind of reform and rationalize their religion, so that, they needed to, that the fact that they don't need to go through the baptism like a lot of Jewish philosophers wanted to do, just
Yes.
like you suggested. But he was saying there is no need for them to go, put them through the trauma of baptism, so to say. But they needed to also give up their particular messianic beliefs, because that runs contrary to the political ideology of the Prussian state. And they should, and if they give up their religious beliefs that run contrary to the political ideology of the Prussian state, they should be accorded citizenship.
Yes.
Equal citizenship. So I was wondering, what was, did Marx ever consider engaging with Schleiermacher's position? Because, Schleiermacher is considered to be a very important important to, the emergence of history of religion, sociology of religion as a discipline as well.
Yeah, no, that's true. Now, Schleiermacher is, I mean, the exact Schleiermacher is certainly predecessor to Marx, but I'm not entirely sure of the exact dates now. How much he
He
overlaps.
must have passed away in 1840s.
That's right. So as I said, he was sort of more or less a junior contemporary of Hegel. And the arguments, for instance, the specific argument that you mentioned, it's exactly what Marx is suggesting would happen in relation to the theological state, right? A Christian state. So the Prussian state, to the extent that it's a Christian state, it's the way it will pose the question of the rights of the Jew would be a theological one. It would be posed as a religious problem. So how would the Jew be able to be included within citizenship? What it would require is a modification or a revision of Jewish religious beliefs and practices to make it more in conformity with the Protestant, official Protestant religion, Christian religion. It would not require a formal baptism or institutional inclusion into Christianity. This is the interesting difference, for instance. Schleiermacher, as if I am not completely certain of the exact work in which Schleiermacher makes this argument, but the argument is fairly understandable. What he's suggesting is that it does not require an actual conversion into Christianity. You don't have to give up being a Jew in order to become a citizen. All you have to do is to change and modify your religious practices, right? So that you give up the messianic belief in some kind of, future state, whatever, some prophetic condition which will emerge in future, so you don't direct your life or public life of the community in that direction. You also give up, as you say, specific practices to make them more in conformity with the prevailing established religion of the Protestant Christian order, right? That is all that you have to do. But it is a religious answer. So, what Marx is pointing out, that is what the theological state can do, because it cannot give rights simply on the basis of membership of civil society, because the state that the state has not been freed from religion. The state is still identified with religion, and so that's the distinction that Marx would make. In fact, I would not be surprised if, for instance, what Marx is referring to when he talks about the way in which the problem of the Jewish question will be framed under a theological state, he is probably referring to discussions of people like Schleiermacher, or there must be others who would have suggested the same thing. Incidentally, at the time, as Marx's own family, there were lots of Jews who formally converted to Christianity in order to gain the opportunities of participating more freely in various occupations in Europe at the time.
I was wondering if I could ask.
Thank you, Partha. Questions, please.
Yeah. If there are no questions, then could I ask a question as well, Partha?
Please.
Sorry. It was really stimulating because I mean, my question is a very fundamental, basic question, which is actually going back to Bauer, to which Marx is responding basically. So this construction, this kind of construction of Christian, uh, is predominantly Protestant. It kind of elides the fact that there are all these Catholic kind of communities, even in Germany, in Prussia at the time, sorry, and certainly in neighboring Austria. I mean, I'm kind of like curious why Bauer it seems like a political strategy as well to kind of describe Christian as a particular denomination of Christianity as Christian, because all of these problems that one associates with Judaism could also, like you said, also be applied with Catholicism, with
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Orthodox.
yeah. No, my sense is that discussions in relation to Catholicism were also around at the time. I think I'm sure there were debates about the extent to which Catholics could be admitted to citizenship, etc., etc. Because there were particularly there were many states at the time in Germany where the larger part of the population was Catholic. But in this particular case, in the Prussian debates, the Jewish question comes up several times, and that's the occasion for this. My own sense, once again, is that, as I pointed out at the very beginning, that in many ways, these questions are being debated. These are sort of proxy questions. The debate is not, their real concern is not what's happening to Jews. I don't think that's the case. It's just because the Jewish question is often, it was at this time often projected as a question of sort of incomplete democratic rights. How should democratic rights be fought for? And what should be the place of religion in public life, right? And it's actually a debate about what should be the nature of the democratic state. What should the democratic revolution ask for? Those are the kinds of questions. And for instance, in this particular case, it's very clear it's a question of actually demanding an end to the identification of the state with religion. That is what all of these people are actually demanding. But they can't actually put it in that straightforward way as a political demand, because that would be immediately suppressed. And so the debates are in these kinds of philosophical terms about the nature of religion and how the rights of particular religions are to be expressed or described in relation to other rights. You see, that's how the debate is actually framed here in this case.
Thanks a lot, Partha. Just so there's a question in the chat box. Should I read it out or?
Yes, please. No, I can't see it. Please.
Okay. So Kaushik is asking this question, and he writes. Marx writes, the dissolution of man into Jew and citizen, Protestant and citizen, religious man and citizen, is not a denial of citizenship or an avoidance of political emancipation. It is political emancipation itself. It is the political way of emancipating oneself from religion. Can you please explain, especially the idea of dissolution? The dissolution.
Yes. So this is once again, this is rephrasing the basic statement that I've repeated several times, that political emancipation is precisely the separation of state from religion. What political emancipation actually means is that the particular inequality, the particular variations between individuals is retained and reestablished and asserted in the domain of civil society. And those precisely are guaranteed by a state which which separates itself from the domain of civil society and declares itself that this is the state of all citizens, irrespective of their differences in civil society. So it's this universal institution which then guarantees the particular rights of particular individuals in civil society. That's the distinction that Marx keeps elaborating on in this particular, in this essay. That is what political emancipation means or can mean. It cannot mean anything more than this. Political emancipation can only mean that the individual distinctions will not matter as far as one's rights of citizenship are concerned, right? The rights of citizenship are universal. They are given to everyone, irrespective of those particular characteristics. But in civil society, those distinctions will very much prevail because those are the basis. Those distinctions are precisely the basis for all the transactions in civil society, for people pursuing their self-interest in civil society.
Thank you, Partha. Are there any more questions? I can't see any more questions. Kaushik, are you? Do you have a follow-up question, or are you okay with? Okay, there is no other comment at the moment. Yeah, so he says that he kind of.
Okay.
আচ্ছা বাংলাতেও প্রশ্ন করা যায় কিন্তু মানে কোনো অসুবিধা নেই বাংলায় প্রশ্ন করা যায় স্বচ্ছন্দে
There's a question from in YouTube. Can I ask that question, Partha?
Yes, please.
Boidurja Chakraborty asks, the relation Marx draws between political emancipation and the state, does it continue to be relevant to this day? How would we think of that question now? I think you probably addressed it, but yeah.
Yes, let me, if I can, because I had two questions which I will leave it. We can address it at some later point. We can address it some later point. The first question is, to what extent is this distinction between political and human emancipation, or let us say the way in which the state and civil society relation is formulated by Marx, to what extent is this still relevant? In other words, is this something that is a 19th century problem, or can we say that this is a question that still continues? And the second question, which sort of follows from this, is that could we say that after following the Indian Constitution, which actually is very much on the model of the Constitution of the Free States, that formally the Constitution itself does not claim any identification with any institutional religion. So there is, as it were, a guarantee that the state will not interfere in religion, or the state is not identified with religion. But does the distinction between state and civil society, which Marx describes, the state of political emancipation, actually prevail in India in contemporary times? And if it doesn't, then where is the difference? Where does the present Indian case not conform to the way in which Marx has formulated this question of the secular place of religion in the private domain, as distinct from the separation of state from religion in the public domain? Those would be the two questions to ask, and to follow Marx's arguments and ask where these don't actually fall into place. We can discuss this later, because we will come back to the question of religion and modernity when we discuss Weber and the Protestant ethic. We'll return to this question again.
I guess there are no more in YouTube, at least at the moment. But I'm sure they keep coming in, Partha, and I will relay them to you.
We will do that later. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe we should bring this to a close today. All students and auditors except Aditi Mondol attended the class.
Rajushi, I'll just stop the streaming.